Hey everyone, my name is Meera. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new to this channel, then I hope you discover some great book and TV show recommendations. Let me know what you enjoy reading and what you're watching these days. Yes, I know it's February and I'm only filming my favorite books of 2022 video now. If you enjoy watching booktube videos, then you've probably already seen a million of these. But well, this is when I could film it, so you have one more video left to watch. Uh, I haven't been reading as much as I would like to last year and even the last couple of months. This reminds me of a meme I had seen some time back, or maybe it was just a post on Instagram. Anyway, it was about how, as a student, you can't wait to start working so that you can buy more books and build your own library. But when you grow up and you're actually fully adulting and you have a job and everything, you have all the money to buy the books you want, but very little time to actually read them. My goal last year was to read about 120 books. As the months of 2022 were passing by, I realized that that was most definitely not going to happen. So I think sometime around August last year, I cut down my goal from 120 books to 75, and by the end of the year I still hadn't accomplished that. It's okay, it happens, right? And one thing that I was very surprised by is that last year, like each month, my reading was such that I felt I was reading more moderately enjoyable books, not many that were straight up 5-star books or even ones that I would want to recommend to everybody. So I thought to myself, would I actually have enough books to make a top 10 favorite reads of the year video? But I actually do, and these are some great recommendations. As I keep thinking about them, I am pretty sure that many of you would enjoy reading these, so I hope you try out at least a couple of them. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the books I'm going to talk about. First on this list is Beasts of a Little Land by Joo Kim. This is a historical fiction that is set in Korea around the time of the Japanese occupation. So the story begins sometime early in the 1900s. It follows the lives of two main characters, Jade and Jung Ho, and all the instances that happens in their life. So it's an expansive story and there are many time leaps. It chronicles their life over the course of several decades. Some of the themes that you'll encounter in this book are that of freedom movement, slavery, assault, abuse, political turbulence. What I loved the most about this novel was the writing. There's such grace to it. In fact, it almost feels like a painting that you could gaze at for hours and you keep discovering more nuance and more details with time. Something that's important for me when I read historical fiction is that the historical events, the stories of these historical figures doesn't feel dull, doesn't feel textbookish. And the author achieves that with such grace. She's incorporated crucial details and information in such a way that it is memorable. Joo Kim's writing is symbolic, and if you enjoy reading melodic and poetic writing styles, and you're gonna love this. This has more of an ensemble cast in the sense that there are so many characters and they all play important roles in the books. It doesn't feel like you're just reading about two main characters, and that's why I feel like it was a very fulfilling read for me. I rated this 4.5 stars. I would highly recommend that you pick this up. Next, Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. I have been enjoying reading sci-fi novels so much lately. Anything that's post-apocalyptic or futuristic, it just excites me so much. Dead Silence is about a space trip gone wrong. Aurora was a luxury space cruiser that went missing decades ago with all of its nouveau riche guests. Claire Kovalik, who's the protagonist in this book, she goes on a maintenance mission and happens to discover the vessel. It's about how, with time, she and her team realize that some really horrific things happened on Aurora all those years ago. Reading this book from Claire's perspective definitely added to the appeal of it. This has been categorized as a horror, but I would say it's a mild horror, and the ambience in the book is what takes the prize. It is extremely well written. The plot points, the plot developments, the pace, the imagery. There's just so much to like about Dead Silence. In fact, it's become one of my all-time favorite sci-fi novels, and discovering this book was one of the highlights of my reading last year. I was really immersed while reading this book, and I'm always on the hunt for something that's just as good. I feel like Dead Silence has raised the standards for me when it comes to sci-fi novels that I enjoy reading. I rated Dead Silence 4.5 out of 5 stars. So if you enjoy reading sci-fi novels, this should definitely be on your TBR. Third, Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Nora, a literary agent, takes a trip with her sister to the location of one of the popular novels that she's worked on. She believes that she has rotten luck when it comes to romantic relationships, but the author proves her wrong as she gradually weaves in a enemies to lovers contemporary tale. This is set in a quaint little town called Sunshine Falls, which very much reminded me of the setting of Gilmore Girls, and that sort of added to my enjoyment of the book. This was such a delight to read. It's all about books and life and people who make a bookish life their reality. The male main character, Charlie, he's an editor. So I love how important the theme of books and reading and writing is in this novel. Uh, Emily Henry's writing style has always been something that I really enjoyed. Her characters is just so realistic and vivid, and in this book too, there's such warmth in the storytelling. Um, the interactions between the characters, the author's writing style, the setting, all of it just felt like a breath of fresh air to me. I don't read a lot of romance contemporary novels, so when I do, I hope that they are unique and not very stereotypical. This just came across as such a wonderful read. I rated Book Lovers 4.5 out of 5 stars. Fourth, The Overnight Guest by Heather Goodenkoff. This is a multi-storyline mystery novel. A true crime writer, Wiley, she goes up to this farmhouse, this isolated farmhouse, to finish up her manuscript. But there's a snowstorm that's keeping her sealed indoors. Suddenly, she happens to find a very young little boy who is lying unconscious, almost frozen to death on her doorstep. Now, as she's trying to get him to speak and figure out where his parents could be so she can bring him back to them, she gets closer and closer to discovering something horrible about her own past. I'm so glad to have discovered this book. It was very engrossing. Granted that it needs trigger warnings, I felt like the whole plot has been executed very well. Particularly the isolation trope, it has been the highlight of this novel. With Wiley being trapped in that place and sort of isolated from everyone else, it really gives you the sense of dread that the author is trying to create, especially because the farmhouse that she's staying at has a gruesome history of murders, and that definitely adds to the tone of the novel. The writing here too goes back and forth between the past and the present. That non-linear style of narration piqued my curiosity even more and kept me hooked to the novel from the start. The writing style is expressive, but it was great to notice that it doesn't take away from the pacing of the story at all. I rated The Overnight Guest 4.25 out of 5 stars. Next, The Binding by Bridget Collins. This is a fantasy novel that is about books and memories. Emmett, the main character, he suffers from an ailment that he doesn't remember much about. So when his parents send him off to work for a binder against his wishes, he feels even more abandoned. In this world, binders are people who take others' painful memories and bind them in books. The more he learns about the art of binding as the apprentice, he comes face to face with an important truth that alters everything he has known about his life. Bridget Collins' writing is enchanting to say the least. I loved the premise and the world building. Her flair for writing is just so evident from the get-go. There are Gothic and fantasy themes in this novel that made it a great read for me. Even though it requires some trigger warnings, and there were also a couple of aspects of the story that I didn't like, I still enjoyed the overall idea and theme of this book. So much so that I gave it 4 stars. You should probably head to my blog to read the full review of this book and all the other books that I'm talking about in this video. I felt bad for Emmett's character because there isn't a lot that's going for him, and even the people in his life aren't the most warm or welcoming or appreciative of him. So you just can't help yourself wishing that things would go right for him at some point. The pacing of this novel is, I would say, medium. In fact, a lot of the writing relies on a good balance of description and action to push the plot forward. I read this several months ago, but it had such an impact on me that I can still recall several scenes and visuals from the book. The sixth book is A Face Like Glass by Frances Harding. This is a YA fantasy novel that is set in a world called Caverna. In this world, facial expressions are commodified. So it's not something that people develop naturally at birth. They're born with blank faces. And the only way they learn these facial expressions with the help of face smiths. Of course, there's a whole class hierarchy that comes into the picture in this book. So the wealthy in the society have more facial expressions to choose from in their everyday life, whereas the lesser fortunate ones have only a few simple expressions to use. I can't believe how much I loved reading this book. It held my attention throughout. The main character is a 12-year-old called Never Fell, who was found abandoned by a cheese master. You're probably wondering what a cheese master is, but then there's just so many layers to this book that you'll only appreciate when you actually read it, and there's so many details. There are probably many things that you're not understanding as I'm telling you right now, but believe me, just read this book. Here, themes of corruption, poverty, and fantasy come together to create a memorable story of defiance and freedom. It is a tome, it's about 500 pages long, but you lose yourself in it from chapter 1. I rated A Face Like Glass 5 out of 5 stars. Next, The Ghost Bride by Yang Si Chu. This is an Asian historical fantasy fiction that is set in Malay in the 19th century. It's about Li Lan who gets a proposal to be the bride. Okay, wait, follow me here. It's about Li Lan who gets a proposal to be the bride of the dead heir of the Lim family. Now, she has very few prospects and she doesn't come from a very affluential background, so she visits the Lim mansion to see what it's all about. And over there she starts to get haunted by this dead heir of the Lim family, but also one of the cousins in the family catches her attention. A series of events then take place and Leland finds herself getting pulled into the afterworld. There's just a lot going on in this book. It's sort of like a roller coaster ride. The Ghost Bride is partly character driven and partly plot driven. It is very engaging. What I loved the most about it is that it's overflowing with cultural significance. I felt like the pace drops a bit in the middle and I wish that some of those scenes would have been sped up, but it's definitely worth the read. It's still vivid in my mind because it has that haunting quality to it, the writing. I am going to be looking at more of the author's work simply because I love the way she narrates a story. It has that nostalgic sense of, in childhood, someone narrating a story to you. I rated The Ghost Bride 3.75 out of 5 stars and I would highly recommend that you pick it up. 8. Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. Honestly, I was wondering whether to add this to the list or Daisy Darker, but ultimately, when I consider the overall effect that the book had on me, I think Sometimes I Lie definitely deserves a place on this list. This is a psychological thriller about a woman who's in a coma. She one day wakes up in the hospital and can't remember what events led her to being there. So she's in such a plight that she can't move or open her eyes, but she can hear, and others don't know this, that she is conscious in a manner of speaking. So she's trying to piece together what happened to her simply based on what she hears others saying. This book will mess with your head. It is disturbing and dark, and it definitely needs a trigger warning, but what an execution. Alice Feeney has become my author by author. I will read anything that she writes. She comes up with some of the best twists and turns that you'll read in thriller books. The novel follows multiple timelines. It also has diary entries in it, which I really liked. Although the characters aren't like good and they do some really messed up stuff. But what worked for me here is how the plot has been constructed and the way the author goes about, executing all of it, how she narrates the story. Some scenes were honestly very chilling. It's not as good as Rock, Paper, Scissors in my opinion, but it's definitely worth reading. I rated Sometimes I Lie 4 stars out of 5. The second last book that I'm going to be talking about is Wild by Cheryl Strait. This is a nonfiction book that chronicles the experience of being a solo hiker on the Pacific Crest Trail. The author is not in a good place. She's dealing with the loss of a loved one, and things haven't been panning out right for her. So she decides to hike the PCT alone without any prior training or experience of having done such physical challenges. What I appreciated the most about reading this is that it's so far out of my comfort zone. It details various events in the author's life that have shaped her into the person she is today, while also giving you a day by day account of her journey on the PCT. I thought the writing might be dry, a little monotonous, but I was surprised to find that it isn't so. Even though I knew next to nothing about hiking or even the terrain, the place, I was getting more and more invested in reading this book. This was definitely intriguing and not at all as overwhelming as I thought it was going to be. I'm keen to read more such autobiographical books now. I rated Wild 3.75 out of 5 stars. The last book on this list is The 13th Tale by Diana Satterfield. This is a Gothic historical fiction. Margaret works at her dad's antiquarian bookstore. She also dabbles in ghostwriting on the side. One day, she gets invited to write for Vida Winters, a famous author. And as she goes up to Vida's mansion, she realizes that there's something to her story that hits close to home for Margaret, and so she sets out to unravel the mystery of it all. The 13th Tale was one of the most atmospheric reads of 2022 for me. Diana Satterfield's writing is so elegant. It switches back and forth between the two storylines that are there in the book. So, on the one hand, you're reading about Margaret being at the mansion, writing down Vida's story. Then you also follow her as she's doing a bit of her own research. She has these recollections about her childhood, and there's some mystery there too. So it's like a multi-layered mystery. I loved reading the chapters about Vida. There's something so powerful in the storytelling that you cannot set the book down. It's not a fast-paced novel. In fact, I would even say that it's slow to medium paced, but I didn't mind that. There are a few unpleasant themes in the book, but they have been covered with tact, and there are no detailed descriptions. If you didn't know this already, I enjoy reading books where houses have a prominent presence, something like, In the Haunting of Hill House or even Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Angelfield House here does have some of a presence, but not as substantial as I would have thought, yet it still creates that perfect setting and ambience for this book. I also listened to the audiobook of The 13th Tale, and that made my reading experience so much more enjoyable. So I recommend that you do that. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. Those were my top 10 reads of 2022. Some notable mentions that I must tell you about are Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levine, I Kiss Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston, and Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. These were also really enjoyable reads. Something I'm really surprised about is that I did not read as many fantasy novels as I thought I had. Most of my picks were either mystery novels or historical fictions. Is that a new trend? Are my reading tastes changing? I don't know. We'll see. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and let me know in the comments which of these books you've read, or are you planning to pick up any of them. I'll see you soon in another video. Bye!